Good morning and welcome to the International Criminology Conference 2021, organized by the Policy Studies Organization, a nonprofit academic society based in Washington, D.C., and co-sponsored by the American Public University System. Thank you all for being here tonight today for our opening plenary. We have a variety of speakers and panels throughout the day. So please feel free to browse the program and attend those sessions which you would like. I remind you, we have at most times of the day 3 concurrent panels running, and you can see that by looking at the room number below the title and time of each session. And the public live streaming links are all available in the agenda. You all have my contact email, so feel free to send me a message if you have any questions or problems with the conference. I'm going to start by briefly introducing our plenary speaker today, Professor Alain Bauer, who is a professor of criminology at the National Conservatory of Arts and Crafts in Paris, France. He's also a senior research fellow at the John Jay College in New York and the China University of Political Sciences and Law in Beijing. Professor Bauer was the youngest vice president of the Sorbonne in France, and he was advisor on national security to Prime Minister Michel Rocard in the late 80s. He's a member of the International Association of the Chiefs of Police, an advisor to the New York Police Department, and has also been an advisor to the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department. In 2007, Professor Bauer was appointed by Nicolas Sarkozy in order to reorganize French studies and research on security and strategy, focusing on the creation of a National Security Council. Professor Bauer is also a multidisciplinary author who has written extensively, and I mean extensively, about all sorts of topics that range from urban and global security, Al-Qaeda, violence in America, and the evolving nature of crime at a global scale. It would be really difficult to list all the books that Professor Bauer has written. So without further delay, I'll pass the floor to Professor Alain Bauer.
Thank you very much, Dan. It's a pleasure to be back on this conference that was not able to be organized last year, but fortunately I will be happy to join this year and maybe to host the next conference in Paris next year. Who knows what's possible during those days. Thanks also to Paul Rich and PSO who helped us organize the conference and of course publish the International Journal on Criminology. The volume 8.2 just went out and we are on the way to publish the 9.1 at the beginning of next year. And of course, you are all welcome to send us directly to Danielle or to me your proposals on publication about crime, criminology, terrorism, strategic issues, including crisis management. Today, my topic will be facing total crisis and the way we can handle those crises at a very strange and extremely complicated time. The title is Crisis, Chaos, Pandemic, Cyber and Global Crime, a time to think and a time to act. Of course, it's always very difficult to understand a situation when you cannot diagnose this very clearly. And for a long time, forecasters and their errors, as well as doomsayers, are often mocked or even singled out when they fail to anticipate a dramatic event. Those who make a profession of retrospective analysis, which is far less dangerous for reputation, more or less deride the Cassandras and other pythias. In Greek mythology, Cassandra is the daughter of the king of Troy, Priam, and Hecuba. She was given the gift of predicting the future by Apollo. She rejected him, and the god decreed that no one will believe her predictions, even though they were correct. After each disaster or tragedy, a commission of inquiry, whether public or less visible, analyzes the reasons for the incident. It usually begins its report by listing all the clues that should have aroused the interest of the states or those responsible for the sector concerned. Also, mistakes are not unavoidable. It is nevertheless up to researchers to continue to develop mechanisms for anticipating crises and threats in order to try to prevent and avoid having to resolve them. In an agitated and unpredictable world, the renovation of strategic thinking, supported by a flexible early warning tool, remains crucial. Since the end of the Cold War, terrorism and organized crime have mutated. They globalized and hybridized in ways that take them, these two increasingly interdependent actors, far beyond the static and retrospective framework in which they were studied in the past. A new strategic thinking, irrigated by the concept of global security, has integrated national defense, public security, corporate protection, environmental issues, and of course, the health dimension can undoubtedly be added to this list. The transition from the Cold War to a hot peace, characterized by a multiplication of destabilization operations, notably on social networks, but also in threats, poisonings, kidnappings, or assassinations, is gradually forcing us to wake up from a strategic siesta marked by the illusions of the post-Berlin Wall era. Most democratic states no longer have a structured and active strategic thinking to deal with these upheavals, despite their considerable potential. Nonetheless, recent developments have shown that concept cannot remain static in the face of evolving and interrelated threats. Ensuring state security and defense requires perceiving and understanding dangers and risks. Yet, as introduced, central or federal administration are almost devoid of the necessary tools to understand, analyze, and deal with what is currently referred to as global security. Because of their tendency to analyze retroactively, these agencies are more able to react to the previous wars and to anticipate the next one. One moves rather quickly from the Azincourt's defeat syndrome to the disaster of the Maginot Line. As a number of brilliant but isolated minds are concentrated in a bureaucratic environment that slows down innovation at best and stalls it at worst. The 2021 crisis, which follows the 2010 H1N1 crisis by barely a decade, and its 1918 genesis, the Kansas state officially named Spanish flu, by a century, has made it possible to perceive its outlines and issues. Crisis, the Greek basis of the word crisis with a C, does not only relate to health. Its etymology refers to distinguishing, choosing, separating, or deciding, in short, to judging. Latin transposed the term to a medical field. The word seems to have been invented to analyze the relationship between a pandemic and the state that was supposed to combat it. In France, the relationship between the state and the nation is very special. While in most countries, the nation was a driving force behind the creation of the state, in France, the opposite seems much more likely. Until now, for each major crisis, a savior or an icon has miraculously emerged from the people or the elite. Charlemagne, Louis XI, Joan of Arc, Henry IV, Bonaparte, Napoleon. The deficiency of politics was saved by the genius of the military, de Gaulle, Sully, Colbert, or Pompidou, taking care of economic, financial, or industrial aspects. Everyone will add to this his favorite hero. The COVID crisis was a grim revelation of the situation. While doctors and politicians were slowly shifting from skepticism to panic mode, exposing years of dismantling the public hospital, the media, disoriented and overwhelmed by the magnitude of an event that is nevertheless recurrent in the history of the world, trapped in the moment, disturbed by the absence of consensus in the small world of media experts and TV sets experts of everything, contributed largely to the dissemination of the original sin of the crisis, the lie by ignorance or omission, much more than by manipulation. Political communication was ridiculed, both on the issue of mask and test and on the high-profile transfer between hospital and the culpable ignorance of the capacity of the private sector and especially laboratories. However, until 2016, France had a remarkable tool for pandemic prevention, the establishment for the preparation and response to health emergencies. The country also had a stockpile of life-saving masks it could have mobilized without closing the country's borders. Political leaders, parliamentarians, deputies, senators, experts, scientific actors, public administrators, government officials, to the president, from the president to the local administrators concerned, had done their job well in investigating, preparing, and informing the population on virus prevention. Alas, others, curiously aided by the attorney of the supervisory administration, have since taken 10 years to deconstruct with determination what could undoubtedly have prevented this major crisis. Other states have also decided on the zero COVID option rather than choosing to live with it. The problem is that the industrial sector has been largely sacrificed to globalization, characterized by the relocation of commercial giants and the privatization of the 80s, but also by the lure of stock options, the often incestuous relationships that have slowly but strongly developed with uprooted investment funds. These different dynamics change the nature of patrimonial capitalism to transfer it into a pure speculative tool in high frequency for the long term. The Holy Alliance between the state and the capital, which has strengthened the country, was seriously handicapped by this competition of alliances. Worse still, many trading structures, particularly academic ones, continued to form and train graduates that had succeeded in developing startups or aided companies that managed to develop effective vaccines in a short time, but outside the country. This has not been the case for example, the French national champion. The health crisis has thus revealed a clueless, stuck, and immobilized state, paradoxically unable to restore confidence in communication, a tool that generally survives when everything else seems lost. In failing to take responsibility for their own redemption after risky statements, which are the joys of retrospectives on social networks, politicians, but also permanent guests on 24-hour news channel, have created and spread a crisis of truth that initially only affected the political and media world. This phenomenon has also spread to the scientific sphere, posing a crucial problem of social trust between the population and these areas. Replacing military with sanitary will almost be enough to republish, Michel Rocard, the Prime Minister of France, which I advised a long time ago, rightly explained that the state was not designed to produce, but to control. Misunderstanding or bypassing the instruction, the administration decided that it was to produce and that the rest would regulate itself naturally. The state was unable to manage a crisis, but the Nation D system, a very French-made organization, made it possible to survive it. Still, civil servants, entrepreneurs, elected officials, capable to re-establish a democratic and solidarity-based state with order and fraternity, are still present everywhere. Unfortunately, the current situation remains worrying. Lack of capacity for prospective analysis on the part of administration, poorly funded university research, almost non-existent relation between central administration, operator, university, or even economic circle, deficient information sharing, few shared priorities, and therefore few precise and lasting common objectives between private and public actors, scattered strategic information, lack of evaluation and synthesis of studies, reluctance to identify real security and defense sectors.
Notable progress and salutary reaction has been made, but they are still too isolated. In adversity, the national genius is more often revealed through coercion and pressures and through preventive but unheard speeches. Training in anti-terrorism, intelligence analysis, and the reactive effects of attacks claimed or assumed by the Islamic State exist in France. The dimension of new risk has been anticipated, that of industrial and food sovereignty, and the challenge of controlling R&D discoveries has been reactivated. One can say that sovereignty is on the way back. In a chaotic and fragmented world, reacting is already being late. A strategic nation must constantly be able to foresee, anticipate, avoid, and prevent. This new agility obligation requires that the nation, in all of its components, state, research, economy, be warned in time. Commercial and financial liberalization, technological innovation, and the development of communication are creating interdependencies. These different dynamics constitute a new geography of real and virtual territories organized around megacities, clusters, and communities. At the same time, they are also creating excluded people for whom globalization increased dispossession and powerlessness. These discrepancies in development are conclusive to dangers such as riots, economic migration, political instability, local conflicts over the sharing of resources, identity, religious claim, and above all, the uncontrollable development of a real criminal economy. Thus, by interweaving interest at a distance and initially limiting tension at the global level, globalization has been able to reinforce these traits at other levels. The new geostrategic tensions, the effect of the post-Berlin Wall thaw, the appearance of new actors and the reappearance of old empires, the revenge vengeance of border, nation, tribes, and religions are sending us back to a decomposed past that we had wanted to forget as if it had never existed. Our amnesias seem to damage us much more than our blindness. Crime itself has become a major player in the international scene, an economic and military operator, ultimately a danger to states and democracies. Crime operates on the model of the advanced liberal enterprise, for example, through vertical and horizontal integration, development of catch areas, introduction of new products, investment in R&D, and even the introduction of incentive for staff. Only the management of competitions seems a little more definitive and mortal than everywhere else. Also, the use of the virtual world makes organized crime even more transnational, freeing it from the constraint of border crossing or ransom deliveries. The cyber virus that spread rapidly, combining purely financial operation with political manipulation. Indeed, among its aberration, we find the dissemination of alternative truths, fake news, while waiting for the much more dangerous deepfake, but also the trollization of the internet space, marked by the creation of an immense outlet for hatred and anger, a sort of radiosphere unprecedented in its power. This space is defined by its cumulative capacity for action, the lack of control over impulses, and the absence of accountability of the users. In addition, and on a more worrying level, different elements could together or separately lead to major explosions. An uncontrollable military escalation from a local conflict, the search of a diversion from international tension in an external adventure, the exact or false perception of a decisive technological advantage, a cyber attack under false pavilion of pretenses. The reflection process is almost clinical. A shared diagnosis, the least successful stage to date, a discussed prognosis, and an affirmed therapy. This is indeed a real Cassandra's work. Analysts of the future will long be astonished by our difficulty by anticipating crises that have been written down, dramas that have been announced, and attacks that have been proclaimed. Those who did not want to read Mein Kampf, those who did not translate the declaration of war to America by Al-Qaeda, those who did not want to read the terrorist propaganda, those who did not analyze the risk posed by cyberspace without its guideline, can still be surprised by events, but there are a few that could not be predicted. As a master of criminologist, Sherlock Holmes reminded us that when you have eliminated the impossible, whatever remains, however improbable, must be the truth. So this is my opening statement of the conference, and you are welcome if you have any questions or remarks before we go through the day.
Thank you, Alain. We do have some questions. Here's a question by Nathamon Pechkla. What is the best way to respond to cyber terrorism?
The best way to respond to cyber, whatever you put after this word, is to understand that cyber is not a computer issue. Cyber is the only alliance between manipulation, social engineering, and technology. And the first part is the most important of all. Responding to social engineering by more data and computer protection is not the answer. The real threat is the human factor, the code, the password, the way to enter the thing, our ability to not change our password, to give the pet name or your birth date as a password, the inability to understand that when it's simple and when it's fast, it's not secure. And then we give opportunities to a lot of operators. 99% of them are using you. Nothing is very sophisticated. It's just a way to ask you to give permission to rob you. Because if you receive one of those emails about this poor Nigerian widow that really wants to give you $10 million because she heard from God that you are a good man and you answer, you are stupid. And there is nothing we can do against stupidity. Of course, you are a victim, but you are stupid. If you get an email from me about getting more air or expanding my reproduction capacity with partners, and I respond, I am stupid. If you receive an email from this magnificent young guy, half naked in the middle of a forest that needs you for $500 to come back home because he lost his wallet and his passport, you are stupid. That is 99% of the operation. 1% is more sophisticated and elaborate. But most of it needs, at one point or another, a ability, a capacity to use you and your weaknesses. Most of the issue is to learn about fighting social engineering and crooks manipulation. The rest exactly is an issue of protection of systems, duplication of system, preparation of a system, taking part on capacity of testing the strengths of your system from the human factor to the technical factor. It's both at the same time, but most of the engineers forget the human factor. They are all focused on software. The most important part of the software is a guy who is writing it, not the software itself. And cyber terrorism is part of the game because it's the same issue and sometimes with the same actors. It's not the same objective, but it's the same kind of capacities that are needed to enter the system, take control of the system, and listen to you if you are in intelligence, destroy you if you are in military, deface you if you are an activist, rob you if you are just a thief, or use you as a terrorism target if this is what you really want to do. So most of these issues are made by people who have some capacities, but not a lot, but a lot of experience in manipulation. and taking part, the manipulation issue, almost as important as a technological issue, will help a lot to protect cyber systems.
Thank you. That's a good point about thinking cyber and not forgetting the human element, which should be obvious, but sometimes we really do forget that human element. Here's another question by Jacob Smith. What do you think the role of the state should be about the issue on the spread of misinformation and how to manage it?
But first, to give a way to tell to somebody what is the truth, you need to be respectable. So you need to stop lying. And unfortunately, most of our governments are liars for good and bad reasons. Lying is like a part of first things to do if you have an issue, first lie, then explain. My position, and I worked with some politicians in my life because I was advisor to many governments, is to try to do the contrary, not lie. Try to explain, because people are smart, are smarter than what you think. Then, of course, they will not be happy. It will be difficult to swallow, but they will give you some respect because you told them the truth, even if it's complicated. Remember Churchill. I will promise you pen and blood. He did not promise them heaven and nice things. He said, we are at war. It will be difficult. This is how we will win. And he won. He won with the respect of his own people, with the support of a nation. Most of the issue we see now is facility, not courage. Courage is just to go and say, okay, we don't have masks, we don't have vaccines, we need to do something. Let us do it together. Not tell them that mask doesn't help, then they need them, that vaccines, that the pandemic doesn't exist. And you have a lot of ways to discuss the issue. The most important way is not to confront and try to explain that you have an alternative truth, because now there is no truth at all. There is no truth as a reference of truth. It's very difficult to have a discussion those days in France as in the US. I usually spend time in Colorado, which is a very complicated state with a lot of people who are against a lot of things because it's a national, local culture. It's not an issue about vaccines, it's the way they are, like Texas, for example. Mandating things is the last possible way to do things. Creating the way of a normal discussion by not confronting the people, but trying to discuss naturally with them is another way. I speak a lot on TV for pedagogical reasons, and a lot of people ask me questions in the streets with the mask. So they have a very better way to recognize me than me to recognize them. And most of the time, the beginning was the pandemic doesn't exist, it's a fake. So I did not discuss the issue. I offered them to come with me in any hospital they choose to see if there's somebody or not on emergency rooms. I did not confront them. I don't have the truth. I have a truth, not mine. It's not better than the others. I don't have to tell people that I know better than them. I try to have them come with me and check by themselves. And suddenly the tone change, the relation change. Because if you offer a proof of fact, you change the possibility of convincing. The question is not convincing, it's creating a doubt, useful doubt that is necessary for people to make their own mind. It's not something you can mandate. It's something you can acquire by letting people go their own way. Like people who leave a sect, they believed in it and they suddenly discover it and they were ashamed, and then they go out and they tell you it's a sect and I was under influence and I get out and now I discover what happened. It's not because they have been abducted by the parents, because they did the way themselves. And most of the issue we have now about fake news, it's not that the state will give you the real news. because it will not work. It's that the state will give you the tools to make your own opinion. And if they go this way, it will be longer, it will be more difficult, but much more efficient.
Interesting, thank you. Another question by Abdullah Al-Farash, and this is in regards to content and conflict in social media cross-border. So the question is, with relation to the cross-border removal request, what are the challenges foreign countries like France face when law enforcement officers want to remove content that violate the French national law, but not policy of US-based social media companies like Twitter and YouTube?
We have
In other
two
words,
options. We have two options. First, the French justice system had required a few times those companies to comply with French law. And we have the same powers in the US. We have out of the border judicial competence, extraterritorial competence. We have the same universal competence in the US system. So usually when people doesn't hear very well what we are asking for very important issues, the best way is the IRS way, because we can seize assets, we can freeze money, and we can also require arrests for people who regularly doesn't respect the justice decision, exactly the same way the US are doing it. We are smoother, more flexible, less, maybe not as strong as, but we use the same tools. And at the moment, it worked a little better because we get addresses and IPs from people on defamation threats, murder threats, terrorist issues, much more easier than usual. It's not always very fast, but it gives more results than before. So we are progressing because everybody has the same issues. It's not, requesting to kill somebody is not freedom of speech. It's a criminal act everywhere.
That's correct, yes. Another question by Leslie Ann Wilson. In your experience, what presents as the single greatest barrier to transnational crime control? In view of a single greatest barrier, what do you think would be some of the most important barriers to transnational crime control?
Offshore money. Crime is about money. Everything else is minuscule. So if you get the offshore issue, I mean the offshore and the offshore inshore, Delaware is a part of the problem. London City is a part of the problem, and not only the Bahamas, the Cayman Islands, Monaco, or Switzerland. I mean, it's more diverse than what we think the first time. But if the superpower decided that it's done with offshore, that money is transparent, legible, easy to follow, then most of the criminal activities will have a huge issue. If you cannot launder, what can you do with your money? Sleep on it? Nothing. So most of the issue is to decide one forever that for to fight criminal activities, drug dealers, even tourist money, which is not a lot, but it's part of the system. What we call fiscal optimization, which is a nice name for fiscal fraud, must be forbidden. No bank will be able to have offshore accounts, no big corporation. Everybody will pay the same tax everywhere, and then everybody will be clean. And criminal activities will have to find another way to get their money. If you don't get money, it's better to be honest.
So that's very interesting, especially right now. You've probably heard of the Panama Papers and all the reporting that has been done around it about how offshore accounts and the entire system that promotes and protects those accounts is it's a lot more widespread and prevalent than we thought. Meaning, big corporations, governments are all allowing this to happen. So in a way, we are saying that governments really are creating their own barrier to fight transnational crime by allowing these offshore accounts. I think is that correct?
Yeah, because the pipeline of IRS dissimulation are used for everything else. They are used for crime, they are used for terrorism, they are used for racketeering, and of course they are used for corruption. Because if you need a way to corrupt people, will buy you planes, arms, tanks, technology, and that you think you absolutely need to get some help, because it's not only about the quality of your product or the price of your product, but a little incentive. And then you have the opportunity to get some money back, kickbacks, corruptions, kickbacks. Then you need to keep the pipeline open. If the pipeline is shut down, but the question of corruption, the question of money, the question of whatever is even fiscal dissimulation will disappear. Mostly, not 100%, but maybe 90%, which is a good beginning. Whose country will resist to the US military power, the British military power, the French military power, the Chinese military power, the Russian military power, if they all say offshore is done? Now, you have 1 week to bring the money back. You will pay a fine, whatever it is, 10%, 15%, 20%. And then it's done forever, no more. Everybody will pay the same tax, corporate tax. I'm not discussing the same tax for IRS, for example. I understand the differences and things, but then you will have a competition inside your own country between cities, counties, states. Why not? Everybody has not the same level of development. Everybody have not the same level of needs. It's like when a big corporation wants to change its headquarters. They look on proposition, but they bring activity. So there's a winning-winning system. As of today, it's a losing-losing system. Because at the end, the only one who gain money is the crime transnational organization. And nobody will ever say they agree with this idea that this whole system has only one benefactor, crime. Hopefully.
Well, hopefully the governments will understand that, and not just for crime, but simply as a matter of global equality, global economic equality. And so it seems that this issue of inequality is tied to crime ultimately and necessarily. Well, there are no more questions. So thank you, Professor Bauer, for being here. And thank you to our attendees for being here as well. We hope to see you in the next panels throughout the day.
I will try to. Have a great day, and remind to everybody, the journal is online and you are welcome to publish on it on the next edition. Not the next one, but the other one after the 9.1 which will be published very soon.
Absolutely. The call for articles for the journal is always open. So feel free to contact the Policy Studies Organization if you're interested in publishing your article, or if you have a book. We also have a book imprint, Westphalia Press. We'll be happy to help you publish your work. So thank you again, Professor Bauer. Have a good day.
Have a good day.